Our course will take us between Washington and New York.
It was a top-secret mission
We will not fail.
that became an international incident.
Report!
Radiation levels are rising too fast.
Now, only one man stands between the superpowers. The mission's over. And total disaster.
I'll tell you when the mission is over.
The fate of the world is at stake in the dramatic thriller K-19, starring Harrison Ford and Liam Neeson.
And action.
Directed by Catherine Bigelow, K-19 is inspired by the incredible true story of a Russian nuclear submarine whose classified mission was hidden from the world for nearly 30 years. At the heart of the story is a crew of unsung heroes who risk their lives on a journey destined for disaster.
We're cursed.
This story could not be shrouded in secrecy any longer. The lives of these men needed to be acknowledged.
The script to me was just fascinating because it's a great story about survival and courage, and camaraderie. Those are epic themes.
The crew need you to show courage, not fear. Fear is contagious.
It was a very harrowing experience, and it bonded these men together in a really extraordinary way.
Our fate is in your hands. May God be with you.
It's a human story of heroism at the nth degree of these submariners saving each other and saving the submarine and possibly staving off World War III.
The radiation is going to kill us all.
Readings rising in every compartment.
I am not going back down! I am not going down!
We could get help from the Americans.
It is treason.
This is an extraordinary story of incredible bravery in the face of what seemed like certain death.
Our situation is desperate. At any moment, we could have an explosion.
Hiroshima, 1.4 megatons.
In their hands, the fate of the world rested.
Surface the boat! Roll, please. And action. No sailors have been given such a boat as K-19. It is the finest submarine in the world.
The incredible story of K-19 unfolds during one of the most dangerous periods in history. The year is 1961, and the Cold War is at its height. K-19 was Russia's first nuclear-powered submarine, designed to launch nuclear ballistic missiles at the United States.
The K-19 was brand new technology, and the powers that be in the military were trying to rush this boat into service and get it on station off the coast of the United States as a deterrent, by the way, as a balance to an American ship which was posing a similar threat on Russia.
Russia felt the urgency. So, in their rush to get the submarine ready, they send this ship out that's barely seaworthy.
Captain!
The drill is over. Do you have an explanation for this disappointment?
Comrade Admiral, it's just another burnout.
That's what I have to fight before I can fight a war.
Liam Neeson plays the ship's original captain, Polenian.
Liam is the commanding officer of the K-19 who's charged with getting it ready. He fails to do that for a number of reasons that are not his fault, but nonetheless, they replace him with Captain Vostrikov.
The last minute, the captain that I play is put in command, but Polenian is kept on the boat as executive officer. So that relationship is fraught with difficulties from the very beginning.
Sea trials begin in 2 weeks.
The boat isn't ready, Captain.
We deliver or we drown.
Vostrikov is a perfectionist, and because the crew is not ready and the boat is not ready, he really has to be tough on them in order to carry out their mission. If this were not a drill, the boat would be crippled and half the crew would be dead.
He's the captain. I'm executive officer. I'm pleased. I'm going to be with my boys.
Polenian is easygoing and a father to the crew. So there's a great philosophical difference between these two characters.
You know what the men are calling this boat? The Widowmaker.
Surprised they confide their fears to their commanding officer.
The crew is a family. The captain is the father.
My own father inspired more fear than he indulged.
Ford brought a unique passion to K-19, serving both as the star and executive producer of the project.
His love of research and detail extends well beyond sort of the words on the page, and he gets very, very involved in every aspect of the production.
Lock it up.
Harrison Ford is a true collaborator. He works through the story, working through the details of the story, challenging the material. And he has a kind of rigor and stamina that is, in a way, that Russian mindset.
Without me, you are nothing. Without you, I am nothing.
I had plenty of advice from people who told me, don't take that part. That guy's not very nice. Oh, that sounds interesting.
Harrison is entering into kind of a unique situation where he's playing a foreign character who in normal times would be the villain. But he has been able to take this captain and create a very heroic character out of him.
Continue the dive to 300 meters.
300 meters is close to crush depth.
I know.
As Polenian, Neeson plays an equally determined individual with his own agenda.
You needlessly endangered this boat and its crew. 200 million Soviet citizens are depending on us, Captain Vostrikov, to save them from nuclear attack.
Liam's a wonderful theatrically trained actor, and he brings a kind of depth of character and credibility to the film.
And here we go. He's a great, great actor. And it lends a stature to the film that just lifts it up. This is the man who did Schindler's List.
I was told there was some complaining. But I said, not my men. They're the best crew in the fleet.
To play the ship's crew, the filmmakers recruited an international cast of young actors.
We have a group of fantastic young actors. Some of them have already distinguished themselves in other roles. Many of them have not. We're getting fantastic performances from these guys, and they have been terrific. Great faces, great performances, great heart.
All hands below! All hands below! In June 1961, the captains of K-19 and their crew of 102 men set out on their journey to the Arctic Sea, unaware of the fate that would await them. The journey to bring K-19 to the screen began in Russia, where the filmmakers shot several key scenes in the locations where they actually took place.
It was very valuable to start the film in Russia. We were surrounded by people that were really Russian, eating Russian food, smelling Russian smells.
I think shooting in Russia was the way to ground all of us in the reality of this piece.
There is no train station in the world that looks like the main Moscow station with the lights and the huge busts of Lenin. It's almost a picture postcard kind of place.
Physically, all of those artifacts of the Cold War are still there. And it was very easy to imagine yourself back in 1961.
Most amazingly, the producers gained access to a formerly top-secret military command center.
This is the finest, most up-to-date submarine at sea.
We shot in the war rooms of the army in Moscow, something that I wouldn't believe would have happened in 100 years. Think about that. 5 years ago, they would have shot you if you even took a step inside that building.
But it's to stop the Americans from destroying Moscow and Leningrad. Only one thing, a certain knowledge of destruction in return. K-19 is that knowledge.
The filmmakers' greatest challenge was recreating the pride of the Soviet fleet. Instead of using miniatures or computers to duplicate the K-19, they sought out the real thing.
We didn't want to create the K-19 with CG, and we were lucky enough to find a Russian Juliet-class submarine of the same era as the K-19.
In a neglected dry dock in St. Petersburg, Florida, the filmmakers found their K-19.
Well, this is the first time we've been called in to make an old Russian sub seaworthy, and I've been in the marine game all my life. It was originally planned that the submarine would be a museum and a restaurant. It didn't work, so the producers have leased the Juliet, and I've been here some 2 months prepping the ship. It's a bit like a patchwork quilt, you know. Yeah. You end up with more patches than quilts.
Once the ship was made seaworthy, it began a 13-day trek up the eastern seaboard to Halifax. There, the film's design team began the arduous task of transforming the decaying diesel sub into the pristine K-19. They worked from a recently uncovered copy of the sub's original blueprints.
Getting the Juliet retrofitted into a Hotel II class submarine was very important to Harrison. He wanted that to be authentic. The Hotel has a much longer sail or conning tower piece and a longer tail, so it was a pretty big undertaking.
A new sail made of fiberglass would nearly double the size of the existing tower. But lengthening the ship would be a far greater challenge.
Basically, what we're doing is we're building from stem to stern the K-19. So the Juliet submarine comes to about here, and we're going to extend it. And that extension has to be seaworthy. In other words, the sea hitting the side of this is an enormous force, and so this is not just a cosmetic build-on. So that's a whole shipyard crew that's building that extension.
Retrofitting the sub and adding more than 100 feet in length was a complicated and dangerous task.
Well, I'd been on it when it was just a diesel submarine, and then they built this thing around it. I keep walking up to it and like tapping on the side, trying to figure out what it's made out of. I have no idea how they did it.
That night, you thought you were in Murmansk, getting ready for the departure of the ship. It was awesome. I mean, you say to yourself, did we build that? I'm amazed that we built it.
Simulate an electrical fire in the galley, please.
Fire on switch box number 65. This is a drill.
During the last 2 weeks in June 1961, the K-19 and its crew were put through a battery of intensive drills to test the limits of the sub. And then, on July 4th, disaster struck.
On its way toward the North Atlantic, one of 2 reactors began to melt down.
The core temperature is at 400 degrees and rising.
And they had about 4 hours to correct this situation, or they would have a nuclear event.
The core would melt through the reactor and start a thermonuclear explosion.
Scuttle the boat. Get the men off in rafts.
We will not abandon this boat. So their way of dealing with the overheating of the reactor was to create a jury-rigged cooling system. Use their fresh water supply. They had 30 tons of fresh water on board and piped that into the reactor in an attempt to bring the temperatures under control. But we're fighting a largely invisible foe, radiation.
We don't have radiation suits.
The warehouse was out. They sent us chemical suits instead.
You might as well wear raincoats.
The sailors have to go into this reactor, I mean, awash, just walking through it to try and repair this weld where the leak has occurred. And of course, they get these heavy, heavy doses of radioactivity.
You can only stay in that room for, a matter of minutes. Well, you really shouldn't be in there at all.
To capture the claustrophobic feel of being trapped in a floating time bomb, the filmmakers insisted on recreating the interior sets to their original scale.
I didn't want to cheat the submarine size so that it was more comfortable for us to shoot in.
Okay, Ian, stand by to shoot.
So it was exactly the size of the K-19. Now you add on to that all of the equipment, and suddenly that space, which already is not terribly large, becomes almost microscopic.
This is some serious claustrophobia, man.
There's a lot of things in
For Liam, even just his size in the confines of these compartments, it made things a little bit difficult.
Not a very good entrance. The first question I asked was, they must have had a height restriction, but apparently they didn't. And there was one Russian captain who was apparently 6'5" or 6", I believe. So he just learned how to walk in those cramped conditions,
Okay, cameras up, picture up.
We're shooting in very difficult environments. It's very close. It's hard to get a camera. It's hard to get lights in. We constantly have to reinvent and make it up as we go along.
Can I just try that one more time, Bill?
To allow for unrestricted camera movement, Bigelow and the production designer developed special tracking rigs.
Mark.
And action.
We've had to accommodate the camera actually moving from compartment to compartment. This was a very difficult challenge. So we built in monorails in many of our compartments where the camera tracks with it. We try and hide these, make them look like pipes for the most part, and you can't really tell the difference between something that's accommodating the camera and something that's part of the set.
Watch out!
As the crew desperately works to cool the reactor, the situation goes from bad to worse. Radiation begins to spread throughout the sub, and the crew is confronted with a new series of crises. To prepare the cast for shooting these scenes, the producers hired 2 former submarine captains to stage a series of disaster drills.
On water! Advance on the fire!
They had them putting out 100-foot walls of fire, and the heat coming off it was unimaginable.
Well, the training here has been extraordinary. It's real, if you pardon the pun, baptism of fire.
Fire, fire, fire! Fire in the missile compartment! C3, C4!
Then they'd fill an area with smoke and put like a little flickering light, which you've got to find. And you could not see anything. And it's a bit hairy, you know?
You're bumping around, you're hitting your head all the time, and you could see how the chaos of if something goes wrong, how it can spread through a ship like wildfire.
Finally, we did hull rupture drills where the compartment itself would submerge in the water, and their survival was dependent on their ability to counteract the situation.
That was so awesome. I don't think any classroom experience could prepare you for getting a face full of water as a pipe breaks open. My adrenaline is pumping right now so much, and I can totally appreciate what these guys go through.
Repair 100% completed! We just saved our ship!
Bigelow was involved in every aspect of the production from the time she began developing the script more than 5 years ago.
What is unique about Catherine as a director is that she brings a very strong point of view to a film. She had done tremendous amount of research on K-19, and then she worked on the script for years.
And action.
She's interested in material that Hollywood considers to be the province of male directors. And I think that's a tremendous asset to her. She comes at it from a different point of view.
All right, let's shoot.
Bigelow's ability to balance the taut interior scenes with the complex logistics of the exteriors was a constant source of inspiration for the cast.
You don't know what it takes to run something like this. It's a bit like orchestrating a 3-ring circus, and she's the conductor.
Perhaps the greatest challenge for Bigelow and her crew was shooting at sea, utilizing a massive maritime fleet.
We have 5 major picture boats. That's the K-19 itself. Then we have the next Canadian frigate that has been changed to be the American destroyer. We also have a rescue sub, and we have the sail barge that has a full working conning tower and bridge.
In addition to the on-camera fleet, there were 27 support craft, including 5 tugboats, 2 prop boats, a camera vessel with a 45-foot camera arm, and 6 safety boats. If anyone from the cast were to go overboard, the medics would have 2 minutes to get them out before they were incapacitated. Overall, the production of K-19 took several months and stretched across 2 continents.
Yeah, start the smoke candles, please. Smoke candles lit up, please. Yeah, hold, please.
The scope of the film was fairly daunting.
Action!
The challenges inherent in shooting on multiple continents, shooting on the water, with an extremely large crew, it was beyond your wildest imagination. But even though the scope of the film was large, its humanity was very accessible.
This difficult task has fallen to you. Our fate is in your hands.
Ultimately, K-19 is the story of an unlikely group of heroes whose ingenuity, determination, and courage can finally be acknowledged.
They were an extraordinary bunch of men.
They will go to the edge and die if necessary.
What's interesting, I think, is to see how they change to meet the challenges that fate throws their way.
Prepare for emergency descent.
This ordinary man rising in incredible circumstances. And who knows what's inside all of us? You know, if something happens, you think, gosh, would I have the courage to do that or that or that, whatever the situation.
He turned himself into a hero.
These people come together because they know what their sense of duty is.
Open the hatch!
Heroism is defined by action, by the grace under pressure and the courage under fire, at a time when the unthinkable becomes thinkable.
Captain, we've been fired on!
Fighter Missile 3.